This Hangout is on air, and that is a good thing because the first time I hit the broadcast button, it floundered, and hopefully the discussion will not flounder. This is a part two, a finishing up of the episode we started to do on Monday, and the torrential rains in California killed us on that one. So we'll see if we can get through with the flooding and, all of nature's grand adventures. And of course, undoubtedly, there's a comet or an asteroid hurtling at us too. So we probably should hurry up and finish this one. How are you this morning, Stephen?
Starting to feel kind of time crunched now, but overall I'm pretty good.
Yeah, that asteroid, it's going to be kind of the grand finale for 2017, I think. It's going to be late December is my sense of it when it enters our awareness and resolves all of our angst over a year of dealing with the bizarre and the unusual and things that go bump in the night.
Maybe it will fulfill our that collective subconscious desire for all this to just be over with, or hit the restart button or something along those lines.
Yeah, there was, I think it was Asimov who wrote some science fiction about how man snuffed himself, and then the next evolutionary stage was dogs became the dominant masters of the world. And then after that, after they had gone full course and snuffed themselves, then the world was taken over by ants, and there was a harmonious society finally in place.
I do admire ants in that way. They always seem so disciplined and organized, and they're extremely strong.
Yeah, they're great. And if anybody's into Marvel comics, Ant-Man is a great movie, and the sequel's coming out, I think, next year. So, But if ants intrigue you, pick up that DVD Ant-Man, and Paul Rudd will fill you in on the power of being minuscule.
Yeah, and that always seems to loop in well with how we perceive ourselves, right? Because in a giant universe, we are pretty small.
Yes, well, according to our ego, yes, and that loops in quite nicely to what we're talking about here, because we had started off with the introduction to Chapter 13, The Guiltless World, and it was our intention to perhaps encourage fellow course students to have that intention of this year putting all of your effort into seeing a guiltless world, to rising above that tendency to hear the claims of the ego that, projecting guilt and absorbing guilt and all the nastiness that's associated with that.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of what you were talking about in the last video about loading up on fear and guilt for the ego. And it really invoked that imagery in me of actually taking a drug. The ego is literally like this drug that we've taken. And we all seem to just be like in this kind of like frantic state because of the drug we've taken, the after effects of it. And we're hoping it wears off.
Yes, and the sad thing is that Jerry Garcia is no longer alive to help us escape from the madness of the drug. His guitar work, some of his riffs were pretty celestial. He would take you up to a higher place, and that's why Grateful Dead concerts were such a great experience, because you'd go there and you'd listen to the music, and you've got the background music. But then the people were all dancing, and it was like they're dancing to different music. What's going on? Well, they were dancing to the riffs of Jerry Garcia, who was kind of doing a jazzy, kind of abstract in and out thing with most of the performance. So it definitely was the Pied Piper effect, and now we have the Holy Spirit as our Pied Piper to get us the hell out of here.
Yeah, it seems like a much more sensible source to rely upon.
Well, you want to start off with the guiltlessness and invulnerability, the first chapter here?
Yeah, sure. So here we go. Earlier, I said that the Holy Spirit shares the goal of all good teachers, whose ultimate aim is to make themselves unnecessary by teaching their pupils all they know. The Holy Spirit wants only this. For sharing the Father's love for his Son, he seeks to remove all guilt from his mind that he may remember his Father in peace. Peace and guilt are antithetical, and the Father can be remembered only in peace. Love and guilt cannot coexist, and to accept one is to deny the other. Guilt hides Christ from your sight, for it is the denial of the blamelessness of God's Son. Anything you want to...
Yeah, basically what we're starting off with here is that fundamental statement that guilt hides Christ from your sight. And of course, if you're Christ and if everybody else is Christ, then who are you seeing and what are you seeing that is causing you to feel guilty? So it starts off by leading us into that recognition that we can't even see ourselves when we are allowing the ego to put its layers and burdens and darkness of guilt upon us.
Yeah, and I've noticed that from being asked that question of why am I feeling guilty, that the ego always has a good reason for that. It always has a good story to give us to answer that question. But every time we can just raise that story up to the Holy Spirit and the light, we always realize that really it doesn't have the validity to make us feel guilty. There's really not a concrete reason for it, even though the ego thinks of it that way.
That's true. It's the devious nature of the ego, but it's our willingness to take that journey with the ego that restricts us and binds us and makes us part of the weakest thing in the universe, the most vulnerable thing in the universe. The human body is susceptible to germs that are microscopic in size. So something that is invisible can creep up on you and smack the daylights out of you and put you in the hospital and make you bleed from your gums and toenails, and it just gets uglier and uglier and uglier. So rather than give a level of acceptance to that, we have to step back and really allow the Holy Spirit to lead us into seeing the truth in ourselves and in those around us. In the second verse here, it says, "In the strange world that you have made, the Son of God has sinned. How could you see him then? By making him invisible, the world of retribution rose in the black cloud of guilt that you accepted, and you hold it dear. For the blamelessness of Christ is the proof that the ego never was and can never be. Without guilt, the ego has no life, and God's Son is without guilt." So, and one of the things that that I think that by innuendo over and over again throughout the course, that journey that Jesus took up to Golgotha and the crucifixion is something that is imprinted in racial memory. So people who have, that darkness in the depths of the subconscious still feel guilty for the crucifixion of Jesus. that's one of the earliest examples of the guilt that we load up on here in 2017. And then there's layers and layers and layers piled on top of that of all the people who have been murdered or slaughtered by war, or ravaged by famine. You know, we carry all of that collective guilt. So that becomes pretty horrific. And then we accelerate that by condemning those around us. You know, this person's an idiot and I just wish he would die.
Yeah. And I think that if you're finished talking about that one part, I think that this paragraph leads up really nicely with what you were saying, kind of as a solution in a way. And it says, as you look upon yourself and judge what you do honestly, you may be tempted to wonder how you can be guiltless. Yet consider this, you are not guiltless in time, but in eternity. You have sinned in the past, but there is no past. Always has no direction. Time seems to go in one direction, but when you reach its end, it will roll up like a long carpet spread along the past behind you, and will disappear. As long as you believe the Son of God is guilty, you will walk along this carpet, believing that it leads to death, and the journey will seem long and cruel and senseless, for so it is.
Yes, and that is a very, like you said, a very powerful insight to work with. So what is it that we have to do in order to step out of this, or step off of this carpet that we're all walking down?
Oh, many times in the course, this always says the answer to that is forgiveness.
Right, forgiveness is the first step, but forgiveness leads into the atonement. See, and when we are at one with God, the atonement at one meant with our Creator, then we are no longer effectively a part of this realm. And so the atonement, when we stop and give ourselves that option of surrendering to it, it only takes a second or two. It's not like it's going to rip you out of this reality and leave you stranded somewhere. It is a momentary glimpse of eternity when you can go to that point of surrender and allow that union to be experienced. And that's what clears the deck. That's what gets rid of this load of guilt that we've all been carrying with us for eternity, it seems like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to say something that from my own personal experience and insight that I've noticed, that when I can enter that state of that bliss in my mind, that it's very tempting for the ego to say, well, that's the unreal. The ego says that's the dream. But in reality, everything's opposite to what the ego says, right? So in truth, that bliss is so much closer to reality than anything else.
Yes, the dream is generated by the ego, and the ego wants to keep as much mileage going as it can. And we are told again, over and over again in the Course, that ultimately the ego has this insane belief that it will survive, it will be eternal. And that part of us that is God, that part of us through the Spirit, is somehow going to be vanquished. So the ego is really kind of a work.
It's found a way to twist our infinitude.
Yes, loop it back on. Well, and you know, that's why it rushes so blindly into every situation. I mean, really, you turn on the 6 o'clock news and some guy walks into a building and pulls out a gun and shoots 7 people, thinking that somehow he's going to miraculously walk out of that And very rarely does that happen, but when it does happen, they usually hunt him down and he'll die like a dog. But the whole time, the ego is entertaining the idea that I can do this and get away with it. And that's what creates a lot of the horrific experiences that are going on in the world around us, is that part of the ego that believes that it is, you know, the supreme element in the universe, and it is omnipotent and guilt, or free from any kind of retribution.
Mm-hmm. I often sometimes feel that a dead giveaway for the ego is it's always trying to flex its muscle. Like it's always trying to show how powerful it is. And I think that what is beautiful about true power is that it doesn't have to try to flex. It doesn't have to try to show it off. It just is.
Right. Well, that gets back to that idea of invulnerability. When we're in our truth, we are in fact invulnerable, because nothing can. The spirit within us. Mm-hmm. As we continue here, yeah, it says in section 4, the journey the Son of God has set himself is useless indeed, but the journey on which his Father sets him is one of release and joy. The Father is not cruel, and his Son cannot hurt himself. The retaliation that he fears and that he sees will never touch him. For although he believes in it, the Holy Spirit knows it is not true. The Holy Spirit stands at the end of time, where you must be because he is with you. He has already undone everything unworthy of the Son of God, for such was his mission, given him by God, and what God gives has always been. So basically, we're getting, we're having that idea reinforced that it's not real, and the awakening is guaranteed.
Yeah, it's something I always seem to notice as we're going through the course text, and as even when I'm reading it on my own, is that there's always seems to be this relaxing happening on a deeply profound level, like a mental relaxing that even carries into the body. My body feels like it's relaxing as I'm reading it, because the truth just feels like it's so calming, it's so soothing.
Well, it's a release from apprehension. You know, we're always in a state of apprehension. We're always afraid that we're going to run a red light and miss the train, and you know, there's all these thousands of things that we have fear around, and it's all about missing out on things or not being at the right place at the right time. And when we start to get into the course, you realize you can't be any place but the right place, and so you can just relax into the moment and stop the adrenal glands for a few seconds, mm-hmm. and just chill out.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and I'll go into this next paragraph. You will see me as you learn the Son of God is guiltless. He has always sought his guiltlessness, and he has found it. For everyone is seeking to escape from the prison he has made, and the way to find release is not denied him. Being in him, he has found it. When he finds it is only a matter of time, and time is but an illusion. For the Son of God is guiltless now, and the brightness of his purity shines untouched forever in God's mind. God's Son will always be as he was created. Deny your world and judge him not, for his eternal guiltlessness is in the mind of his Father and protects him forever. You have any?
Kind of a yeah, that's kind of a magical dance here with rhetoric, if you really get into the rhythm of what's going on. Because the innuendo here, once you start to look more deeply into it, is that You will see me. Well, who are we talking about? We're talking about Jesus. As you learn, the Son of God is guiltless. And that takes us into this space of stepping back and allowing ourselves to go beyond the projection of the ego that is coming from our brothers, our sisters, even the animals around us, and to see Jesus in every individual we encounter, including ourselves. So this is a very powerful concept, as it's helping us to transcend our personal ego and to allow ourselves to merge with the ego of Jesus, which was the most perfected ego in human history. And then from there, go into a transcendent state where the pure Christ doesn't have any shadow of an identity, doesn't have any shadow of a flaw, no shadow of darkness or anger or fear or enmity or even of self, where we become one with the ultimate self and are fully at peace.
Yeah, and Chris, could you talk a little bit more about what the perfected ego is?
Well, in order for Jesus to stay in this realm, he had to wear the ego, the personality. That's, what all of us are dealing with, is we created a personality and identity. That is the ego. Well, Jesus had, in the course of 33 years, refined himself to the degree ego was man perfected, in other words, the Christ. But he still carried that shell of identity so that he could remain here and be communicative with the people around him, where it wasn't just a bright light in the corner of the room talking to you through your mind, because that would have scared the hell out of most people and probably us. But in order for Jesus to have a presence on this planet, there had to be this very thin veneer of personality, of the man who was the master of the environment he stepped into, the master of all the situations that he encountered, because he carried the grace of God with him. So that really is what we are aspiring to in our journey, is to surrender this personal ego, which is gluttonous and, self-absorbed and infatuated with all of the dramas of the earthly experience, and to slowly let that dissolve as we use Jesus as an image, as an identity to try and step into. And then, of course, the final step is the step of the ascension, the transcendence. And interestingly enough, in the biblical descriptions, when Jesus transcended in that after that 40-day period between the resurrection and when he left the earth, the description was that the light that he became was completely and utterly unearthly, that it was a brilliant light that was not known to human consciousness. It was not something that we experience on a day-to-day basis. So when you walk out in the sunlight, that's very compelling, and that's part of, as we're moving back more and more to that identity of being the light. But the sun's light, it pales in comparison to the light of spirit, to the light of God. And that ultimately is what we will eventually surrender to, which is the ecstatic experience.
Right. And so that, that gives everyone a whole lot to digest if you're watching this video or, or you're following, just following along. It's a huge idea that I think really rocks our paradigm of what's possible. And so if it seems far out for you, then that would be totally normal, because we've been really conditioned, I think, from a human standpoint to reject that. That's kind of the whole ego's agenda. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that fifth sentence there, when he finds it is only a matter of time, and time is but an illusion, and then that falls into, for the Son of God is guiltless now, and the brightness of his purity shines untouched forever in God's mind. So that's who you are. That's who you have always been in eternity. But you forgot that. And so you stepped away from it momentarily. You embraced the ego, and how much light are you emanating in the world? And how much light can you emanate in the world? That's the whole thing. As you take off the layers of personal ego, and allow more of this transcendent ego to emerge, more and more you are the source of light in every area that you enter into.
Yeah, and I really enjoy how he talks about, in the second line of that exact passage, he has always sought his guiltlessness, and he has found it. And it really reminds me of how that carries into our lives, of all the things we seek so regularly. I mean, if you're a human being on planet Earth, everyone here needs 3 meals a day, or at least to eat. I mean, maybe you're one of those people who doesn't eat breakfast, but we still need to eat every single day. And we still seek so many things, the next new toy that we want, the next new thing that we want to give us some sort of temporary satisfaction here. But I love how he says that the Son of God has always sought it, but he has found it. It's always found. It's always right here. It's a present reality. It's not something we have to attain.
Right. And that, that's the beauty of it. It's coming into the moment, coming into stillness. You step out of time. And that leads us into this next section here. When you have accepted the atonement for yourself, you will realize there is no guilt in God's Son. And only as you look upon him as guiltless can you understand his oneness. For the idea of guilt brings a belief in condemnation of one by another, projecting separation in place of unity. You can condemn only yourself, and by so doing, you cannot know that you are God's Son. You have denied the condition of his being, which is his perfect blamelessness. Out of love he was created, and in love he abides. Goodness and mercy have always followed him, for he has always extended the love of his Father. So the atonement does give us this gift of seeing beyond the trivialities of individual egos, and to get a greater sense of the truth of what it is that animates the people around us. And so that's why, again, the atonement is the only escape avenue that is available to us.
Right. And when we talk about escape, obviously we're not talking about an unhealthy denial or any of that nature, but we're talking about the escape back into our true nature, into the remembrance of our true nature.
Absolutely.
You want me to continue with the next paragraph?
Why don't you skip down to 8?
Okay.
This is a good one.
You are invulnerable because you are guiltless. You can hold on to the past only through guilt, for guilt establishes that you will be punished for what you have done, and thus depends on one-dimensional time, proceeding from past to future. No one who believes this can understand what always means, and therefore guilt must deprive you of the appreciation of eternity. You are immortal because you are eternal, and always must be now. Guilt, then, is a way of holding past and future in your mind to ensure the ego's continuity. For if what has been will be punished, the ego's continuity is guaranteed. Yet the guarantee of your continuity is God's, not the ego's. And immortality is the opposite of time, for time passes away while immortality is constant.
I love that idea of invulnerability, because really it all is, again, that process of looping things around. I remember a few months ago I was bouncing around on YouTube, and I happened to check out one of Joel Goldstein's videos, and I was kind of stunned at some of the ultra conservative Christians who were posting on this video.
You mean Joel Osteen?
Yeah, Osteen. One post read, I pray to God every day for Joel's death. I want God to kill him.
Oh my gosh.
And oh yeah. And I'm looking at these things and I'm just going, oh my Lord, if you only knew the reality of that idea that whatever you wish upon another, because of the law of one, because there is only one of us, you are wishing upon yourself. So, if you're going to say anything, keep it at least neutral, because when you're in that space of condemnation, and when you're in that space of telling the world that you want this person dead or crippled or beheaded or whatever, that is something that loops around, and you carry the guilt of that as well as the potential for stepping into that experience yourself.
But what about if you're really a lot more awakened than that person and evolved? Is it okay then?
No, condemnation is never, 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 never acceptable. It may seem, instinctive, and it may give you that rush of fulfillment momentarily, but the reality is it's going to sneak around behind you with a hatchet.
Oh, it already has, right? As soon as you even have the thought.
Well, that's the whole thing, is the constant thing of realizing that the thoughts are transient. As long as you don't hold on to it, as long as you don't, run away from it, as long as you don't give it any power, you can just observe the thought and think, well, that was a stupid thought. Just let it go through you. Let it be what it is. And slowly you will refine the mind, and you will train the mind so that it won't have those thoughts. But those thoughts came initially from the ego, and we have to learn how to counter those thoughts by not resisting them, but by turning them in the right direction of, oh, I forgive myself for this, and I forgive myself for seeing this error in this other person. It's all forgiveness over and over again.
Yeah. And as far as this section goes, did you want to keep going with it, or did you want to wrap up?
Why don't we finish this one up with number 10 there, if you want to take that one, and then we'll 10 and 11, because then we can pick up with number 2 on our next one.
Okay. So 10 says, you cannot dispel guilt by making it real and then atoning for it. This is the ego's plan, which it offers instead of dispelling it. The ego believes in atonement through attack, being fully committed to the insane notion that attack is salvation. And you who cherish guilt must also believe it, for how else but by identifying with the ego could you hold dear what you do not want?
Yes. And that was what I was saying. Let it, step into your spiritual being. Let it be an idea that moves through you. Don't resist it. Don't attach anything to it. Look at it and say, oh, that was, a mistake. And I forgive myself. And release it and invoke the Holy Spirit and say, okay, Holy Spirit, I'm turning this over to you.
And you want to read off the last text?
Yeah, we'll finish up with number 11 here. It says, the ego teaches you to attack yourself because you are guilty. And this must increase the guilt, for guilt is the result of attack. So again, you can see how convoluted all of this stuff becomes. In the ego's teaching, then, there is no escape from guilt. For attack makes guilt real, and if it is real, there is no way to overcome it. The Holy Spirit dispels it simply through the calm recognition that it has never been. As he looks upon the sinless, as he looks upon the guiltless Son of God, he knows that this is true. And being true for you, you cannot attack yourself, for without guilt, attack is impossible. You then are saved because God's Son is guiltless, and being wholly pure, you are invulnerable. So this is the highest level of empowerment. This is, showing you how the surrender to truth is where the real power lies. And that inclination to go out and pound people down and, fix them by extracting their sin that you're seeing in them is probably not that good an idea.
Yeah, it's always a good opportunity to really stop and reflect, I think, when you get in that state of being where you feel that urge to go do that.
Very true.
So do you feel like we're pretty complete with this section, or is there more we should say about it?
No, I think we've pretty well covered it from every possible angle. And, the real point of it all is for you to recognize that you are invulnerable, but it is a conditional thing. The condition is that you step back from the ego and step toward the Holy Spirit and embrace that idea of forgiveness. And then you can walk through this world here without locked doors, without carrying a gun and or a hidden weapon of some sort. So it's all reduced down to the journeys that you are taking in your mind, because that's where all of these things are happening.
Absolutely. Great perspective to remember. So we'll pick up then next week on Monday at 10. Well, actually, I might need to change it because of my schedule, but because of my work schedule, but I'll let you know.
Sounds good. Well, in 1 week, we will start with the guiltless Son of God, and that is describing you and me and everybody that we encounter.
Yep, because there's only one of us here.
That's true. Well, have a great week, Stephen, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, you too, Chris. Bye.
Okay, bye.